Tonight's speaker, Dr. Craig Hazen, is the editor of the philosophy journal, Philosophia Christi. He is also the author of the monograph, The Village Enlightenment in America, the acclaimed apologetics novel, Five Sacred Crossings, and dozens of articles and chapters in various books and journals. He's a recipient of the Fisher Award, the highest faculty award at Biola, and has lectured across North America and Europe on key apologetic topics, including lectures on Capitol Hill and in the White House. He's a popular church and conference speaker and former co-host of a national radio talk program. Here presenting how a thoughtful person would go about a religious quest, please welcome Dr. Craig Hazen.
All right, this has got to be one of the strangest things I've ever done. You know, I don't know if you saw the movie Religulous, but you know, Bill Maher actually interviewed people in a trailer decked out with Christmas decorations. You know, I've been in something like that before. This is rivaling it. It's kind of cool. So glad you're here. Can you hear me okay out there? No? Okay. How's this? Way to go. Well, I'm thrilled to be here when it's raining. I'm from California. Plan to fill up a few flasks and smuggle them past TSA on the way home. I was just up in Washington State. It wasn't raining there. You know, it's supposed to rain there, but here it is, raining in Texas. In fact, we'll see if we can make it through without getting you drenched. So I checked the weather report before going to Washington, and I don't go there very often, but I checked the weather report. It's actually telling me about bear warnings. You know, I didn't see anything like that coming to Texas, but let me read this thing from Washington. So I printed this out. Check it out. Check the weather report, and this flashes up. So the Forest Service has issued a bear warning in the local forests, and they're urging everyone to protect themselves by wearing bells and carrying pepper spray. It says campers and hikers should be alert for fresh signs of bear activity, and they should be able to tell the difference between black bear dung and grizzly bear dung. You can imagine them studying this in school. Well, black bear dung, it says, is rather small and round. Sometimes you can see fruit seeds and or squirrel fur in it. But grizzly bear dung, on the other hand, has bells in it and smells like pepper spray. I know many of you get all of your information from the internet too, so we could just believe all that stuff. Hey, you know, I don't know the actual, you know, average intelligent quotient of a person who would attend this, so I don't know how to pitch the discourse, you know. So let me give you a quick quiz. Please just shout out the answers. It'll just give me a feel for where you're coming from. All right, let's start with the topic of theology. What do John the Baptist and Winnie the Pooh have in common? No, it's not honey. You would think that, but it's not about honey. Middle name. Their middle name. This is a brilliant group. Okay, now, I think we all know that that exhausts all theological knowledge. So we move on to another topic, gastronomy. You look like you can handle a question in gastronomy, right? What do you call cheese that isn't yours?
Nacho cheese.
Oh, this is Texas. Of course you know nacho cheese. Yes. Would you explain that to the people in the back? I have a little trouble with that. Again, Spanish, a little foreign language quiz. What do you call 4 bullfighters in quicksand?
Cuatro cinco.
Cuatro cinco. That's exactly right. This is a very bright group. I'm going to have to raise the bar. Okay. I will combine the subject of auto mechanics with home economics. What's the difference between a Harley and a Hoover? The location of the dirt bag. If I see hairy guys wearing like jean vests, you know, I usually look for an exit. I think we're okay. And one more, meteorology and sociology. I like combining these topics, meteorology and sociology. How are a Texas tornado and an Arkansas divorce the same? Somebody's going to lose a trailer. All right, I'm feeling good about you people. So I run a graduate program in Christian apologetics at Biola University. Biola is B-I-O-L-A. Stands for the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. You know, that's what it was at the beginning. It was just kind of a competitor with Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, you know, and so people studied the Bible. And they actually did so at a fairly high level. I mean, there were some really great scholars even in the earliest days of Biola. It's since become a university, and it's got some wonderful programs in like music and nursing and obviously Bible and theology and so on. One thing that might startle you a little bit is that there are more students studying philosophy at the graduate level at Biola University than any school I could find on the planet. Yeah. But you wouldn't think that. You'd think that it would be a bunch of people studying, you know, Koine Greek and ancient Hebrew and so on, and learning how to exegete the Bible for future parishioners. But there's actually quite a strong philosophical movement at Biola. In fact, it's kind of culminated in a journal, as I mentioned, that I'm the editor of this journal called Philosophia Christi, which is the top circulating philosophy of religion journal in the world. It's published right, you know, in our department at Biola. So it's a weird situation. I think something that can only happen in Southern California, where you've got, you know, some Bible institute becoming kind of an expert place in philosophy. And so that's just kind of a strange business. But I run this apologetics program. In case you're unfamiliar with that term, apologetics simply means you know, offering reasons for faith. If you're talking about Christian apologetics, it's offering reasons for faith. I actually think this thing is true, and I think it's defensible, and you can offer up evidence and good reasons to defend that. Now that might blow some of your minds. What's he talking about? Clearly, religion is all about just closing your eyes and leaping blindly into some religious chasm. That's what it's really all about, right? No, I don't think so. I think it's actually real. I think this Jesus stuff is true. I think God exists, and I think there actually is a story of all that ever was, is, and will be. And so I'll do my best to lay some of that out. But I am amazed at how the Christian worldview can kind of stand up to other worldviews. I experience this a lot when I go to secular university campuses. I was at the University of Miami a couple of years ago, and that's a wonderful, they got a wonderful scientific research center there. And so some Christian students invited me in to give a talk. I mean, they really thought that I ought to shoot for the moon. It was reconciling science and faith. Yeah, I can do that. And they were going to buy pizza to attract students, which I always think is a good idea. If you can feed some hungry college students, usually that gets the ball rolling. So they actually had a big lecture hall, and it was pretty full. There were a lot of hungry students on this particular campus. And I never know how to approach a topic. Sometimes I come in with an idea for a topic, and I'll change it at the last minute once I look at the crowd, you know. I do a little calculation as to whether I will actually survive this meeting, you know. But they look like a nice bunch, but I still didn't know what to do. And so, those of you who are Christians here tonight, so I prayed, I go, God, give me something for these people. And I had an idea, all right? And by the way, I have the spiritual sensitivity of plankton, okay? So I don't hear from God. My wife hears from God all the time. And it's almost always about me, you know? So I get this idea, perform a miracle. I thought that was brilliant. What better way to get a little talk on a secular university campus, especially in the science sector of the university, what better way to do that than performing a miracle in front of the crowd? So that's exactly what I did. In fact, the miracle I performed was actually captured on film and was published on the front page of the Daily Hurricane newspaper the next day. So it was all mostly ridiculous, but I got up in front of the crowd and I said, thank you for having me here. I look forward to trying to address the question of reconciling science and faith. And it seemed to me that it would be good if I were to do something a little bit out there to get the discussion going, and I thought something out there would be to perform a miracle. So they're looking at each other, and these were all science students, you know, so some of them were like calculating the vectors, you know, to get out of the building and grab pizza, you know, so they don't have to deal with this nonsense. So I go, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to perform a miracle. And so then I proceed to loosen up. It doesn't get any strangeness. So I'm loosening up so I can perform the miracle. And they're looking at me like I'm an idiot, because they were probably right. I was mostly an idiot at that point. So I'm loosening up, getting all centered, ready to perform my miracle. And I open my eyes, and everybody's leaning forward. And because they think I'm going to do a magic trick or a backflip or something. You know. And in fact, there's a girl with a camera right here. She's the one with the newspaper, from the newspaper. And she's got a camera ready to go. And I go, are you going to try to photograph the miracle? And she goes, good luck. So, get all loosened up, all centered. Other side. Thank you. Yeah. Now, they're pretty disappointed at my miracle, and they're starting to shout at me like this is a big scam. I want my pizza and I want out. Yeah. Like, no, wait a minute. I know that you're upset, I said to them. I really should have thought this through better. That was probably too much for you to take in one meeting, for me to perform a miracle, especially on both sides of my body like that. And they're like, you're an idiot! Now they're just saying it, they're not even thinking it. I said, well look, clearly it was a miracle. I mean, we can all agree at that, right? I mean, I used to teach physics, and for goodness sakes, I used to teach Newton's laws of motion, and a body at rest is going to remain at rest unless it is acted upon by an outside force.
Yes.
And there was no outside force. There was no fishing line in the ceiling pulling my hand up, right? There was no wind blowing through here, blowing my hand up. Nothing! Suddenly, out of nowhere, without any warning, boom, the hand goes up. Please. You know, I know this is a shock to you, but if you think it's not a miracle, help me understand why it's not a miracle. Well, now they're shouting at me, and I don't have, my hearing's not very good, so I couldn't hear them anyway, but they're shouting, and I'm really losing control of the crowd. And fortunately, some guy stands up. This is a guy, he's out of Central Casting, science guy, you know? And he's a tall fellow with balding hair and glasses, and he's got a white lab coat on and a pocket protector with overhead projector pens. And because he's tall, it takes him a while to get out of his chair. He gets all the way up, you know, and I could just see by the looks the students were turning, oh, it's Professor so-and-so. Oh, watch this. This guy really knows his stuff. He'll explain that arm thing. You know. So this guy must have been a professor of physiology or something. And he begins to explain all of the cascade of electrochemical activities that take place in order to get an arm to go up. He's like, there's C fibers firing, there's axons, and there's dendrites, and there's acetylcholine, and there's synapses, and there's potassium, there's a line of nerves running down out cervical gap X, running down to the deltoid muscle, and when it hits a particular action potential, you know, potassium's released, actin and myosin cross over one another, the deltoid contracts, and the arm goes up, you know. And he plotted through this explanation, you know, for like 90 seconds, so that everybody could be very clear about how it all worked, you know. And everybody's like, yeah, but that guy said, you know, that's no miracle. There's a perfectly valid scientific explanation. I go, wow, that was amazing, you know. Honestly, I used to study physiology myself, and that was a fantastic explanation. But would anybody like to add the important elements that Professor so-and-so left out, you know? And nobody wanted to go against Professor so-and-so. So they're really getting mad now. What do you mean he's wrong? What are you talking about? And I said, look, you've got to explain that. We can't violate Newton's laws of motion. What got that cascade of electrochemical activity that resulted in an arm going up going in the first place? He didn't explain that. They're yelling some more. I had no idea what anybody was saying, except there was a girl sitting right next to the girl with the camera in the front row. So she was shouting loud enough, and she looked angry enough to where I could actually hear her. But here's what she was saying. Actually, I mean, I just saw her going like this. And then I tuned in and I could hear her. She said, "You did it." That's the explanation in her mind. "You did it." I said, "Wait, everybody, shh, 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 shh. Calm down. You gotta hear what she has to say." And she tells me, and she goes, "You did it." And I go, "Tell them." And she stands up and she goes, "No, he did it." And I go, "Yes, that's right. You see, I did it. I did it. I am not my body. I'm tightly associated with this body. I can make it do all kinds of things, and so can you. You see, there's something more going on in me than can be explained by the laws of chemistry and physics. There's a non-physical or immaterial part of me that needs to be engaged in order to explain these basic things." The reason I was calling that a miracle was just a gesture to get some discussion going, because you're probably walking in here with a world view that thinks that everything in the universe, both seen and unseen, can be explained on the basis of fundamental physical laws. Well, some of it can't be explained that way. It doesn't mean it can't be explained, it just can't be explained using those particular modes of thinking and insight. And so we had a great discussion after that, but it really showed me that the Christian worldview carries with it some elements that are very helpful. That my arm goes up because I engaged in an act of free will, and that is there's no scientist on the planet who could actually bring a free will into a laboratory and do some, run some experiments, and figure out what that is. And it's not a physical object, but it's very real, and we all know it's real, and that has to be dealt with. All right, that was just free. That has nothing to do with my talk tonight. So, in fact, what is the title of the thing I'm doing? Oh, really? What is it?
Religious quest.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. What is it? It's
how a thoughtful person would go about a religious quest.
Okay. How a thoughtful person would go about a religious quest. I did my doctoral work in religious studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara, which is a top-tier program, and it was a great opportunity for a guy like me. At the time, I was a Bible-reading, Jesus-loving Christian, and I was really walking into some pretty hostile territory. They generally thought people like me were the greatest plague on the planet, and I hope to bury some of those stereotypes. I don't know if I did or not, but I made some good friends in that department. In fact, I still hold the record for winning scholarship money in that department. I was actually a wealthy graduate student. I kid you not. I applied for everything under the sun and won all of it. So, pulling my Mercedes into the student parking lot was real sweet. Not quite that rich, but still, got the whole thing paid for through crazy scholarships that were just kind of dumped on me. It was wonderful. So I had this opportunity as a Christian to compare all of my Jesus-loving, Bible-reading ways to the teachings of the great world religious traditions like Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism and some Native American traditions and Mormonism, you name it. I got a chance to look at it up close and personal. And I discovered something about Christianity along the way. That it's weird. Right? If you're a Christian here, you signed up for a strange one, you did. If there's a box called religion, right? And you try to drop Christianity into it, it doesn't go in. You can saw pieces off and push some more, and it's like a cat. Have you ever dropped a cat into a box? Small box. Try to drop the cat, it goes meow. And you can't get the cat in the box. Christianity doesn't fit this box called religion very well. And that was very enlightening to me at the time, and very interesting. And there's several reasons why Christianity doesn't fit that box. Now I want to highlight some of these tonight, but let me start with this one. The first one that really captured my imagination. I think it would be especially germane for a meeting like this. One thing that captured my imagination was that Christianity doesn't fit in that box very well because it's testable. It's testable. And what I mean by testable, it's not a perfect philosophical word, but it's a good one to communicate to lay people in churches. It's testable. What I mean by that is that you can offer evidence for it, you can offer evidence against it, and the evidence actually means something. In other words, you can make decisions about whether to be a follower of Jesus based on the evidence of the case. Now, some of you can imagine this causes even some Christians to have a pause. Wait a minute, that sounds risky. Well, it is risky. Christianity is a very risky religion, I discovered, because it is indeed testable. In fact, let me demonstrate this by reading to you what I consider to be one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature. You don't find something like this in the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddhist Tripitaka or the Quran or the Book of Mormon. This comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Check this out. Check this out. Paul is writing on the resurrection of the dead, and in the midst of doing so, he says a couple of things that are startling to people with modern religious sensibilities. In fact, I'll just read this to you and see if you can figure out why I would call this one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature. He says this, "But if it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." Really? He continues, "More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God, for we've testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he didn't raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, empty, worthless, and you're still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied." Now, why would I call that one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature? Was he crazy? What was he thinking? And by the way, if you're going to go start your own religion, now this is Texas, this may not happen, but in California, it's a likelihood, you know. So if you're going to go out and start your own religion, don't do it this way. This is a miserable way. Well, this is a way to set yourself up for immediate failure. All right, you don't make some big claim about a miracle and let people go check it out. That's not a good move. All right, what you want to do if you want to start your own religion is dole out lots of spiritual wisdom and never really say anything that can be tested. You see. So the people are always wondering, or they're always in a cloud of mystery and mysticism, you know, and then you dole out little bits of spiritual wisdom for lots of money. That's how you start. That's a good business plan for a religion. Okay. What the Apostle Paul did is really not advised. He hung Christianity by a thread, right? The thread of the resurrection. It almost invites people to come and snip this thing. And now, it turns out, in my view, this thread is made out of some super titanium alloy that really does break about every pair of scissors that gets near it. I think the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is stunningly good. I would go so far as to say it's probably one of the best attested facts of the ancient world. It's really remarkable how good the evidence is. But for tonight, I'm really not talking about the evidence for the resurrection. I'm simply talking about the nature of Christianity, that it's testable. And in my view, that sets Christianity apart from the pack because other religions really aren't testable. I mean, some are just very upfront with this, like Zen Buddhism, you know. Zen Buddhism isn't objectively testable. They don't even claim such a thing. Now, it's subjectively testable, I guess, because you want to feel like on the inside, in some way, you are moving closer to enlightenment as you engage in practices of wisdom and meditation and so on. But there's some religions that sound like they're testable, but they're really not once you poke and prod a little bit. One of my areas of expertise is Mormonism, and I've experienced this little situation at my doors with Mormon missionaries and local bishops and faculty members at Brigham Young University, and even apostles in their church. When you start asking some hard questions about some things that seem very testable, right? You know, were there gold plates upon which were etched Reformed Egyptian characters, and Joseph Smith is able to translate these things into the Book of Mormon? These seem like testable questions that history and evidence and testimony from the past might bear on some of these questions. And so when you start to ask some questions and poke and prod a little bit, what do the missionaries do? What do your local bishops do? What do the faculty at BYU do? And what do the apostles in the Mormon Church do? They all do the same thing. I've seen it happen. They all take a step back at that point and say, well, look, you bring up some very challenging issues, but you have to understand something. I have had an inner testimony that this is true. See, what if now it sounded like it was testable, didn't it? Because they're laying out all these historical facts about gold plates and ancient languages, and on it goes. But when you poke and prod a little bit, they pull back and say, no, it's really about something going on inside of me. Now this, some of you have had enough encounter with Christians to know that that's what the Christians are always doing. I'm ashamed to say you're right. I'm not saying that's the way it's supposed to work, but I'm afraid it's bad training and bad understanding of the religion they've bought into. I mean, I won't get into all that, but nonetheless, I want to assure you that in its raw form, I think we've demonstrated with 1 Corinthians 15 that Christianity is a testable religion. And it's not about just simply closing your eyes and leaping blindly. There are ways to actually get at the truth of this thing. So that's one thing that sets Christianity apart from the pack. Now, let me relate some other things to you that demonstrate the uniqueness of Christianity by telling you a story. This is a true story. I invented some of this stuff on the fly when I was invited to give a talk at a community college in Southern California. So I'm at Biola minding my own business, and my office phone rings, and it's a teaching assistant from a community college. They're having a world religion survey class, and they want to invite a fundamentalist in to talk to the class so they can actually see one of us, you know snarling and drooling. So I just keep picturing the little meeting they were having in order to get this lineup of guest speakers at the end of the term, because that's what they do. Towards the end of the term, they turn it over to guest speakers. They'll bring in a Roman Catholic nun, and they'll bring in a fundamentalist, and a Buddhist monk, and so on. So the students really enjoy seeing some folks firsthand at the end of the term. I could just imagine, like, you know what we need to do? We need to expose these students to a fundamentalist. Where do you find those? And somebody goes, Biola, I can just imagine this, and I have no idea this really happened. So they dial up Biola University, and I can just imagine the operator picking up the phone, hello, Biola University, and on the other end they're going, hello, I'm looking for a fundamentalist, please. One moment. and then it comes to my office, And so, we have hundreds of faculty members, but I get the call, and I'm glad I did, because once I heard what they were doing, it sounded like a lot of fun. They said, all right, great. I said, look, I think you're a little confused on what a fundamentalist is. I don't really consider myself one, but I know something about the American fundamentalist movement, and I can talk to the students about that if you'd like. And he goes, yeah, that sounds fine. Just be here at 8:30 on Wednesday. And that was 8:30 in the morning, by the way. I'm thinking there's going to be no students, because this is college, for goodness sakes, right? If it's not a required class, you're not going to be there at 8:30 in the morning. It turns out it's a very popular class. Students are very interested in Southern California in checking out these various religions. And a lot of them are in this class, sort of taking them out for a test drive, I wonder how Buddhism handles in the corners, I wonder how Islam accelerates, They want to kick the tires of some of these religions and maybe make some decisions. So I get there, and the students, it's a fairly big lecture hall, so I imagine a small class. The students are shuffling in, and they're looking pretty bleary-eyed, right? But they're carrying giant cups of coffee, so I have some hope for the future. And they're settling in, And I met the teaching assistant. I said, oh, I'd love to meet the professor. Is he or she in the class today? And he goes, yeah. I go, oh, well, where is he? And he goes, he's over there. And he kind of motions with his head down this first line of chairs and desks. And there was a man sitting at the far chair, and he had his head down on the desk. And I said, oh, is he sick? And the guy goes, no. Well, I got the backstory later. Turns out towards the end of the term, this teacher turns over his class to guest lecturers and his head TA. And he basically goes and chases girls and drinks all night, similar to what we're doing here. And he wakes, and in the morning, of this early morning class, you know, he's got some terrible hangover, and so he always looks terrible. People think he's sick. I thought he was sick, so I didn't go over and greet him. But oh, fine. So then they gave me this introduction. I don't remember exactly what the introduction was, but I remember what it felt like. You know, it felt like here's Craig Hazen. His education probably consisted of memorizing Bible verses at Bill's Bible College in Feedlot. You know, that's how it felt. But so after this introduction, and this guy is sleeping it off down at the end, I'm thinking, you know, I have free reign in this class. You know, so I go, hey, students. Now, we can talk about fundamentalism, like what's in the syllabus or on your schedule or whatever, but and that might be interesting to you, but you know what would be more fun? What would be more fun, and I was thinking about this driving down here for a bunch of college students like you, would be to see how a thoughtful person would go about sorting through all these great religious options you're checking out in this class. Right? Because you're a bunch of smart people. You're majoring in accounting and organic chemistry and zoology and all kinds of cool things. And how do you engage your mind, you know, in the same way you engage those subjects, so that you can sort through in a proper way all these religious options? And you can just tell, like, the Starbucks had just kicked in because they're like, oh, what did he say? Yeah? Well, let's do that. Let's do that thing that you're talking about, the search thing. Well, all right then. That's what we'll do. By the way, I have no idea where I'm going with this. So I'm like, okay then. Well, it seems to me, after studying all the world's great religions, that if you're a thoughtful person on a religious quest, you would obviously start that quest with Christianity. That's funny. That's the look they had on their faces. Go ahead. Then I met a guy in this class. He was like my foil for the whole morning, and you wouldn't expect it of him. He's got long, stringy blonde hair. He's a typical California surfer guy, and he had a skateboard with him, and he had two surfer buddies sitting next to him. Right now, this guy with the long, stringy blonde hair was way smarter than he looked. You know. And the two guys sitting next to him, not so much. But I got to tell you, I wrote a book on this whole experience. Actually, I drew from this experience at this community college. I wrote a book called 5 Sacred Crossings, which highlights all of these points. It's not the story I'm telling you now, but the guy with the long, stringy blonde hair, he made it into the book. He's one of the main characters. I was so impressed by this guy. I even made up a backstory, and I'll bet it's true. So this guy, he kind of gets in my face from clear in the back of the room, dead center. He's like, dude, I thought you weren't going to give a lecture on fundamentalism, but the first thing you say is, my religion's best, so you got to start with it. And I'm like, I go, oh yeah, I know, I can see where you get that idea, but that's not what I'm saying at all. So look, let me give you 5 reasons why a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity. And they're like, all right, what do you got? I go, okay, the first one. The first reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that Christianity is testable. It's testable. And I explained some of the things I've already told you about, that you can offer evidence for it, you can offer evidence against it, and the evidence means something. I read to them that passage in 1 Corinthians, and I said also, you know, look, it's sort of based on the resurrection in many respects. If you can, you know, undermine that or demonstrate it's true, you're in really good shape either way. So it might take you 7 days, might take you 7 years, might take you 70 years to really do a thorough examination of this thing, but in principle it's possible. I told him, I actually talked with a very famous Buddhist teacher one time, and I said, so how many cycles, how many trips on the wheel of samsara, you know, how many lifetimes will it take for you to finally be liberated and thrown off into nirvana? And he goes, oh, that would be like 1 times 10 to the 60th power of lifetimes. So I told the students, look, you know, you can give Christianity a shot now. It might take you 7 days or 7 years to actually get to the truth of the matter, but, you know, you got a lot of cycles going, you know, if you're going to join the Buddhist bunch. So, but anyway, the point was made that Christianity is actually open to investigation and decision-making based on the facts of the case. All right, they said, what else do you got? I said, all right, I didn't have one other one before I started making stuff up. The second reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that in Christianity, salvation in the system is a free gift from God. It's free. And these were college students. They understood the concept of free, you know. They're always looking for a free sandwich or a free haircut or a free music download. So, free! So, and so I said, look, there's no crawling over jagged rocks for miles to lay some offering in some temple. No sitting in arthritic lotus positions for hours on end in hopes of moving closer to enlightenment inwardly. No, nothing like that. It's just a free gift that God gives to you. I'm like, wow, you know? And I read it in that famous passage in Ephesians chapter 2, you know, for it's by grace you have been saved through faith, not by your works, so that no one will boast. And I said that verse really doesn't capture really the notion of Christian grace is remarkable when you start reading the parables of Jesus, like the parable of the prodigal son. I won't go into it here, but Lee Strobel, you probably know that name, Lee Strobel, he just came out with a book called The Case for Grace. And each chapter is kind of an explication of the grace of God in people's lives. But when you get to chapter 4, you know, he focuses on people and kind of interviews. And he interviews me in chapter 4 on how grace plays out in other world religions. Is the Christian concept of grace unique? And I have done some comparative work on that, and I think it is. I think the concept of grace, this free gift of salvation in Christianity, is different than anything you're going to find in another religion. So there's something you can check out, chapter 4 of The Case for Grace. So the students were kind of tracking with me, all right, so we got this testability thing going, we got this free salvation. That's exactly right, because people are thinking, free? Is that really true? You know, and by the way, Christians, we don't make enough of that. People wander around constantly thinking that in order to achieve, you know, some sort of reconciliation with God, it's really a list of do's and a list of don'ts, and I think we're not communicating very well on those points. So the students were like, do you have anything else? I said, all right, yeah, I got something else. Here's one. In the third reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest should start that quest with Christianity is that in Christianity you get a tremendous worldview fit. A tremendous worldview fit. And what I told them was, Christianity paints a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is. Christianity paints a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is. It's funny, some of you have looks on your face like the students did, especially that one guy, I call him Darren in the book, this stringy-haired surfer guy. He's like, you know, there's a little problem with that, because basically you're saying that my religion's so cool it matches every fact known to human beings and unknown to human beings, you know? And I go, you know, that you're exactly right. That is a big, bold, brash, and overreaching statement, something I couldn't demonstrate here in our midst, but let me at least give you one example. And it's a very important example, and it has to do with evil, pain, and suffering. I said, how does Christianity deal with evil, pain, and suffering? And how do, say, most of the Eastern religious traditions deal with it? And they're like, all right, what do you got? I said, well, let's start with the Eastern traditions. You probably know this from studying these religions in the class. They didn't. But anyway, it said, by and large, the way people handle evil, pain, and suffering from, say, Buddhism or Hinduism or some of the others is they kind of relabel evil, pain, and suffering. Maya, right? Which is a Sanskrit term for illusion. They try to rename it illusion and then hope that it kind of drifts away. Right? So the whole program is to deeply assimilate way down inside of you the idea that evil, pain, and suffering are illusory. And if you can get to a certain point, they will evaporate from your life. Now that's pretty attractive, but is it really true? Does it really comport with your experience, or does it seem like it's really out there? I think it sounds really out there. I said, look, how does Christianity deal with the problem of evil, pain, and suffering? Very differently. But if you're thinking about the Eastern traditions and calling it all illusion, listen to this example. Say the doors open in the back of the room, and in walks an elderly woman, and she's got a shock of gray hair, and she's got a cane, and she limps her way down the stairs in the lecture hall, and she sits in the front row. Well, we don't get, classroom invasions by elderly women very often, so we pause for a moment and say, Madam, what's your story? And she doesn't hesitate for a second. She stands up, she turns to the class, and in a thick Polish accent, she starts telling this gripping tale of her experience in Nazi-occupied Poland during the Holocaust. How one day, troops came in from the Reich and started gathering people up and stuffing them onto train cars. Oh, they had them packed little suitcases like that was going to make a difference, But this primarily Jewish village was just herded out to the trains and stuffed into the cars. In fact, they were stuffed so tightly that they couldn't fall down. Even if they were to fall asleep or die en route, they wouldn't hit the ground. That's how tightly they were packed. And you can imagine during the sweltering summer months how horrible that would be. People were dying in those cars as they chugged along, heading towards camps of concentration. Finally, they arrive, they throw the doors open. A lot of dead are falling out. They're throwing them aside, and they're herding people into a couple of camps. One big one where most of the people are going. And this elderly woman, which was just a little thing, she gets herded into a work camp somehow, miraculously. And the gas ovens are churning day and night, but this little girl gets a chance to work for a couple of weeks until, fortunately, the Red Army comes in and liberates the camp. But here stands this little girl. Everybody's gone, and she's a little thing. She's wearing almost nothing. She's almost starved to death, and everybody in her family and everybody in her village is gone. But somehow she finds a way to pick herself up and march down through history, and she stands before us today. And what are we gonna say to her after hearing her story? What are we gonna say to her? Are we gonna say to her, cheer up, lady, turn that frown upside down, just think happy thoughts and the world will be your oyster? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think just talking about Maya and assimilation of this idea is going to suddenly have evil, pain, and suffering of that magnitude evaporate from her life. Why? Because this was real. It was real. And Christianity, for all its positives, does a pretty good job with the problem of evil, pain, and suffering. We certainly don't have the answer to every instance of pain and suffering. We just don't have that. We're just not given it. We do have some pretty good reasons. We have some pretty good ways of handling the bigger problem. But at the end of the day, we recognize that it is indeed real. And our great calling is to get down in the trenches where people are suffering and to bear them up the best we can in the name of Jesus, who himself suffered dramatically, so he knows what we're talking about. And the Christian story says it doesn't end there. We worship a God who one day promises to wipe away every tear and to correct every moment of injustice. And so there's a robust way of handling it. We're not calling it an illusion and brushing it off the table. So in that respect, using that example, Christianity paints a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is, in my view. I won't give you number 4 because it's a little technical, and I'll leap right onto number 5, which is a little more provocative. So, let me give you the setup. The class was almost over. I didn't know when the class was ending. I figured somebody give me a heads up on it, but the students were all packing their bags. I noticed there was a door on the side of the room over here with a little window in it. There was a professor-looking guy staring through with his glasses down on his nose, tapping his watch, you know, trying to give me a hint. You know, oh, I better wrap this thing up. So I noticed everybody was getting antsy. I said, all right, hang in there, everybody. One more issue. And, all right, the fifth reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that in Christianity, you get Jesus at the center. So they looked a bit like that. But then surfer guy goes ballistic. I mean, he actually got very animated at this point. Said, oh, I can't believe this. Did you ever see what he just did? Oh my gosh, goodness, he is a fundamentalist after all. You know, he's playing the big Jesus card right here at the end when there's no time to respond. Oh my goodness, we should have seen this coming. Yeah. And I said, wait a minute, what in the world have you people been studying in this class? Look down to see the professor. He's still got his head down, good to go. What in the world have you been studying in this class? I mean, clearly you know that Jesus is the universal religious figure, right? I mean, everybody wants a piece of Jesus. Everybody wants to take him and co-opt him and change him up a little bit, but they like him so much they want to make sure he gets planted in their religion too, you know. And so it just makes sense that if you're a thoughtful person on a religious quest, you'd start the quest with the religion that has him firmly planted at the center from the very beginning. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, well, Buddhism, for instance. In Buddhism, Jesus is often considered a reincarnation of the Buddha himself. If not that, he's certainly considered a great bodhisattva in the Mahayana tradition, right? Somebody who brings people along up to the point of enlightenment and then steps back to help even others. In Hinduism, some Hindus have mentioned to me, they think Jesus might very well be an avatar of Vishnu. He's that impressive to them. If not that, they generally think he's one of the top religious teachers of all time. In Islam, for goodness sakes, in Islam, Jesus emerges as a figure greater than Muhammad himself, right? Muhammad, it's clear from Islamic tradition that Muhammad's a prophet, but so is Jesus, clear as a bell. But in addition, Jesus is born of a virgin, he's a legitimate miracle worker, and will stand with Allah at the scales of judgment at the end of time. I'm not sure of the exact score, but it's something like, you know, Muhammad 1 and Jesus 4. The bigger point being that everybody wants to bring Jesus in and make him the center point. So all I'm saying is, if you're going to start a religious quest, it makes sense to start with the one that has Jesus firmly planted at the center. I remember I just got that last part out. The students were all standing up. I just grabbed the stuff off the lectern that I brought in, and I just walked out a door on the side of the classroom and just kept walking until I got to some picnic tables and just dropped my stuff. Took a deep breath and noticed a bunch of students were coming out and encircling me, which is never a good sign when I'm on a secular university campus. It can get dicey sometimes, you know. Unfortunately, they were not hurling sharp objects at me, but you know, throwing some sharp questions, and we had a great chat. And I remember because we started drinking coffee, then we were eating sandwiches and afternoon pastries, and I'm not sure I went clear to dinner time, but I might have. But they'd never heard anything like this, like you can actually think through religious choices and options, and they were dying to discuss it. And they found Christianity at a new level of fascination because of those unique features involved. All right, I'll stop there and
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hazen. First question, to what would you attribute the apparent rise in atheism in our culture?
Oh, I think that's easy. I think radical Islam has done more to advance the cause of atheism than anything in my lifetime, easily. I think it really is, people have been able to catch on to the notion that, man, this religion thing can really go off the rails, and it's time to step out and put it in its place, you know, whether rationally or however else we need to do it. I think that is one of the primary motivators. And now, don't forget, I'm talking very generally, so that may not fit your profile, but I think by and large that is the reason for the acceleration of atheist activism in our day. Hi.
Dr. Hazen, so your talk, you talked about the how a thoughtful person would go on a sort of religious journey, and you say that they should start with Christianity, yes? My question is, where should they end? And building on from the last question, how would a thoughtful person transition perhaps from Christianity to atheism? And do you have any good examples that you can maybe suggest of people who have made that transition in a particular good way?
What a great idea. I should come up with a reverse talk. You know? Now, first of all, what was I doing there? Was I really giving a presentation to those students on how a thoughtful person would go about a religious quest? Not really. I just wanted to communicate with them some unique features of Christianity and get them to pay attention. And that's what that talk is all about. So it's really just highlighting some things that I've discovered in my comparative religion studies that set Christianity apart from the pack. Now, one would hope that a thoughtful person would go about it that way, because I would find that intriguing. I mean, if I remember I became a Christian as a senior in high school, and if somebody sat me down and said, dude, you gotta check out Christianity because number one, it's testable, I actually like that idea if I were an unbeliever. The idea that the salvation is free, I go, that is a no-brainer. The worldview fit, I'll give you some arguments on that. And the Jesus at the center had no idea. I'm not sure if that means a whole lot to me, but I like that testability business, you know? That rings true to me. So I'm not exactly how the reverse engineering of that whole thing would work in terms of atheism. What are the unique features that set atheism apart from the pack? You know, I can imagine coming up with some, but haven't really thought through it that much. But thanks for the great idea.
So can you speak to anybody that you know that's done that well, in your opinion?
Because what you're really talking about is making the case for atheism, but I want to know why atheism is a standout. Now, this is difficult to do because atheism claims to be apart from the pack of religions, I think, and I was talking about the pack of religions and what causes something to stand out from it. So it's a little bit of an apples and oranges thing, but I'm still intrigued by it. I just have to do some more thinking. Thanks for that.
I wanted to broach this possibility that maybe the fact that Christianity is big constitutes something that merits at least a little introductory, prima facie kind of reason to consider it. If billions of people have agreed on it, does that suggest, or at least, you know, the broad outlines of it, does that suggest that it merits special consideration? Now, the reason I ask is, if you expand out into theism broadly, or some sort of God belief, some sort of supernature, if we're talking that most people in the world believe in something of a supernatural type of sort, theism, pantheism, polytheism, something like that, or panentheism, wouldn't atheism be very counterintuitive and perhaps border on, say, a conspiracy theory if it says that all these people are so radically deluded, yet the only reasonable starting point is to not believe in God until some overwhelming evidence has been shown, when apparently a lot of people seem to think that sufficient evidence or sufficient reason or explanation merits theism or supernaturalism broadly.
So there's a lot of good things to talk about in your question. I like the first one. Is it just an upfront good reason to take Christianity very seriously because there's so many people in it? I suppose, at least at some minor level, yes. I mean, in this respect, clearly it is scratching an itch for a lot of people, and maybe because it's scratching that itch, it's onto something about what human beings are all about, and perhaps where they've come from, where they are, and where they're going. Maybe those are related. So it would lead me to be intrigued by it. I mean, I've never been all that interested, say, in Scientology. You know, it's kind of fun to say just because it's bizarre, but it's really not going to shake the world. You know, so the numbers game actually has that effect on me. Now, if there were 1 billion people in Scientology, I'd probably pay it a lot more attention and find out what it is that's going on in there. Now, what you bring up, though, is a double-edged sword for Christians, it seems to me. Having studied, world religions, and being in the evangelical Christian community, I'm kind of out of place in many respects. I found it difficult to talk about the positive aspects of Buddhism, for instance. Why? Those of you who are Christians know, because some Christian who hasn't studied these things or really isn't very thoughtful about this stuff will say things like, well, if you're not clubbing it, you're loving it and embracing it and probably doing some sort of weird syncretism, ushering in Buddhist practices into Christianity. But here's what I think. I mean, for goodness sakes, it's been around for 2,500 years. And it continues chugging along, and it has captured the imagination of many people around the globe for 2.5 millennia. So, isn't it reasonable to think that it's got something going for it? And maybe even Christians ought to ask the question, what is it? Maybe, get this, maybe there's something I can learn from a Buddhist. Now, I don't think Buddhism is ultimately right. But I think there's things to learn from Buddhism because that a lot of people are getting that itch scratched by it, and maybe it behooves us to pay some close attention to that. This kind of question really does fascinate me. There's a book called the New Mormon Challenge, and the first chapter is written by me. It's a collection of essays by evangelicals talking about Mormons and Mormon scholarship and so on. But I wrote the first essay, and the essay was about a question that fascinates me no matter what religion it is, and that is, why would anybody sign up for it? Why would anybody sign up for it? And so that's what, in this particular book, I wrote a 25-page chapter on why did people sign up for the Latter-day Saint movement in its earliest days? What was it that was attractive about it? And I think that's very important. I think that's important for people who are unbelievers here to take a very careful look at Christianity and find out what it, why I would think it's true, what it has actually done for me in terms of life transformation and the whole thing.
Well, one of the reasons I asked is I employed that as a bit of a working introductory argument for God's existence, just to say that I'm not concluding on that basis that lots of people hold to it, therefore it's true. That would be an ad populum argument, that's fallacy. But when it comes to credibility, if two heads are better than one, wouldn't billions of heads be better than a few million?
Yeah, I mean, just keep thinking of the wonderful word consensus gentium, though.
Yeah, but it's not saying it's true. It's saying
right.
Does it have prima facie?
But that rattles in my head like a maraca, and whenever I hear that kind of argument. But I edit a philosophy journal, and sometimes when I read an abstract that comes in by an author proposing an article, like that'll never work, and then I actually hear their full argument and go, they made it work. So more power to you.
All right, so John's question has sort of inspired a question of my own here.
My talk wasn't good enough to inspire a question.
So maybe not necessarily focusing on the number of people in general, but like if we think at an academic level, where does the truth-seeking take place in terms of these big questions in life that religion also seeks to answer? Is there a department that seeks to look after that? And I think that would be generally philosophy departments, and in particular, philosophy of religion is that special branch of philosophy which focuses on the question of whether God exists, and if so, what are the properties and things like that. So it seems to me maybe one way to approach it, if you're trying to think about, hey, where should I begin the quest, is you might want to begin the quest where most people say is the most credible, where the most experts sort of hang out at. And from what I understand, according to a recent poll, is that at least 70% of the experts in philosophy of religion have concluded that God exists, and it seems reportedly that the vast majority are Christian. That, for me, if I'm talking to someone who raises this objection of, look, there's so many religions out there, where do you start? That's sort of what I go to. What do you think about that approach?
Well, there's definitely been a renaissance in Christian philosophy, especially in the field of philosophy of religion. And in the journal I edit, we're trying to make sure Christians touch on other fields of philosophy too, and not just on the question of God and evil and miracles and things like that, which have been covered very well in the history of Christianity. We've done some really good work. There's always new and good work to be done, so I'm glad new people are working on it, but sometimes we just need good Christian philosophers who bring that worldview to the game to tackle other questions as well. What you said, this really may not apply to your question, but it reminded me of something very interesting. Because if you go to a college campus and wonder, where am I going to find Christian wisdom at a secular university campus? I know where you find it. You actually find it, and the studies have actually borne this out, you find it in engineering schools. And departments of soil science. Applied sciences are where the Christians end up hanging out at the secular universities. And there are many, you can imagine some of the reasons why. And the far end of the spectrum, where you're not going to find Christians, would be the humanities. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to find physics. Then you're, at the far end, you'll find the applied sciences. Just in case you're on campus looking for where they hang out, that's where they hang out. Oh, you know where else they hang out once in a while? Or, you know, it might be the place where you actually get a dose of realism better than any other part of the university. That would be the Department of Economics.
Say I go on a religious quest and I spend 3 years looking at Christianity, and it's, I think, 51% I don't think the resurrection happened. What would you say is the next religion to try?
Oh man, what a good question. I think it's Buddhism. Good luck with that though, but I think it's Buddhism. I think
why?
I just think it's. I don't find Buddhism plausible, but I think it's more plausible than the rest. I think Christianity is just way beyond the scope. It's just in terms of its plausibility. But I think Buddhism is the most intriguing, and it seems to me that it's got the most for a person right here in this life too. If you really give yourself to it, it can actually bring you peace in this life. It's really devoted to that and has honed those skills well over thousands of years.
Another question inspired by your talk. What's number 4?
Oh, number 4. All right. When I was teaching that class at the community college, there were a lot of Asian students, and it got me thinking that there was when I studied Eastern and Asian religions, that I was always bugged a little bit when some of my friends who were proponents of those religions were saying, you know, one thing I really like about the religions of the East is how holistic they are. How holistic they are. And so my 4th point was, a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity, because in Christianity you get to live a non-compartmentalized life. That is, you get to live a holistic life. And so some of the Asian students in the class were arguing with me on that, and I said, no. I go, what I have discovered about Asian religions is they are about as bifurcated and compartmentalized as you could possibly imagine. They go, what do you mean? I go, here's an example. Take the issue of rationality. I find 2 very big and hermetically sealed compartments in Asian religion. If you want to engage in rationality, that's, you know, thinking and sorting through evidence and doing mathematics and all that kind of thing. In the religious life, that is verboten in Eastern religions. It's in almost all of them, it's considered an impediment toward enlightenment. It's a blockage. It's something you want to remove from your life in order to have the pure experience of an Eastern religion. So that's what you get in your religious life. But in your everyday life, rationality applies constantly. You know, A cannot equal non-A in your everyday life. You have to look both ways before you cross the street. You have to work hard to get your taxes right, or the IRS comes after you. You have to think before you feed your baby, because you have to make sure you're feeding your baby strained peas and not battery acid, right? So those are all just simple elements of rationality which don't apply in the religious life. So I made the claim that Eastern religions generally are compartmentalized, and Christianity actually brings those two spheres together. We actually enter into our religious world with our eyes wide open and our minds engaged. We worship a God who says, "Come, let us reason together." Right? We worship Jesus, who is the Logos, or the reason of God. You know, so it's part and parcel of our religion.
You did your doctorate in religious studies,
Right.
rather than philosophy or theology. Why is that?
Yeah, some of that's just a personality thing. When I was in college, I wanted to major in everything. You know, every class I took, I wanted to suddenly change my major to that because it was so interesting. I ended up finishing an undergraduate degree in biology, but I took every philosophy and religious studies course I could pack into my schedule along the way, and ended up shifting gears and going into religious studies. But what I discovered about religious studies is that it's a banner under which you can do just about anything. Perfect for a guy like me who wants to major in everything, you know? And so I got a chance to study all kinds of great stuff. I like the field of new religious movements. I like American religious history. I like science and religion. I like apologetics and the whole thing. So I got a chance to do it all in religious studies. So that was very attractive to me. And I edit a philosophy journal, and so I know very well what philosophy papers look like. And honestly, they're a little bit tedious after a while, you know. So all that analyzing of propositions and such, you know, just get tired of it. So that's why. Thanks for that question.
You talked earlier about how Christianity is based on testable evidence, whereas a lot of modern Christians will talk about their internal experience. I guess I wrestle as a believer with that dichotomy a little bit, in the sense that it seems to be you've got sort of the more intellectual Calvinist bent Christians over here, and sort of more the experiential based Pentecostals over here. And I can say that because I go to Pentecostal church. So the Calvinists over here seem to, though, ironically, always assert that it's this move of God within you that's going to make that difference, to bend your will back toward Him. And so there's this sort of like I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be a contradiction, but that's, I guess, my question. Can you speak about that? Like, why the emphasis on apologetics from the crowd that seems to most highly endorse, I don't want to say burning of the bosom like the Mormons do, but more this internal move of God that has to happen? What's up with that?
Yeah, I probably have to dialogue with you more to get some more clarity on that, but let me just say this. I mean, I work with people who don't fit the profile you picked up. A guy like J.P. Moreland, man, that guy talks more about personal miracles and miracles he sees in his own church, and he's always on the hunt for the latest miracle report. He just does so much to encourage him, and he is a philosophical machine and an anti-Calvinist all at the same time. You know? So here's a guy who loves philosophy. He's deeply devoted to apologetics, very very involved in evangelism. And thinks that signs and wonders are the real deal today, and thinks there's good evidence for that. And at the same time is a thoroughgoing, Arminian. And I work with a lot of guys like that. So that perhaps that's the new wave. And I love apologetics coming out of that. I like for some of you this might sound weird, but I think that's actually not a bad holistic approach to Christianity. You think God lives, He's active in people's lives, He wants to save people, and He's actually given us a lot of good reasons to believe all this stuff if we're open to it and want to do a little digging. Thanks for bringing that up.
How would you
get at someone who wants to be on a spiritual quest but automatically discounts Christianity due to the church's apparent stance against the cultural, I guess, acceptances of things that they would normally be against.
Yeah, that's a good question and a hard one. But because all I want to say is, oh man, you gotta try it out anyway. You know, and dive in. You know, and I'm just one of these guys. I hate to get all evangelical and testimonial, but oh my gosh, what God has done for me. You know, where else would I have gone? There's this great passage in John chapter 6 where Jesus, honestly, he goes crazy. He loses it. You know, in John chapter 6, Jesus is shouting to a crowd. He goes, you gotta eat my flesh. Because they didn't have microphone. Yeah, they didn't have amplification, so here's how it sounded.
You gotta eat my flesh, and you gotta drink my blood, or you have no life in you.
Could you imagine? I mean, he wasn't addressing a vampire convention. This was a group of, you know, practicing Jews who were very careful about what they ate and drank, and he's got this flesh and blood thing going. Oh my goodness! And the text says that people started to walk away from him, like, we're done here. And then he wheels around to the 12 who are following him, and he goes, all right, are you guys leaving too? And I love what Peter says. It really captures this notion. He goes, where else are we going to go? And I love that comment because he's like, I think implied there is, we've seen those other so-called messiahs and rabbis come through town, those other spiritual gurus. And honestly, they don't hold a candle to you. But I gotta tell you, I have no idea what you're talking about with this flesh and blood business, you know. So I love the raw nature of his response. In other words, I don't understand everything about you, and what you're saying right now is driving me crazy. But I can guarantee this: I have no other game in town. There's just nowhere else to go. This is my only hope, you know, to quote Princess Leia.
You said that Christianity makes a lot of sense for you to become a Christian, but people are not stupid. And why do you think people don't become a Christian?
Yeah, why is it that people don't come to Christianity? I think there's two primary reasons. One is a very important theological reason for Christianity that none of you are going to like, and that is from the words of Jesus. You know, people just love their own sin. They love the lifestyle they have. They don't want to even contemplate having to shift gears, even if God gives them all the wherewithal to do it and all the grace and the whole thing. So that's the theological reason. There's a sociological reason too. And it's embarrassing. The church is a disgrace most of the time. Oh, gee. It's just a mess. Now, I'm part of the church, so I'm probably part of the mess. So I wish I could help out better here. But it's a disaster. In fact, that's what I cry out to God about. Even though I believe all this stuff, I go, God, why did you leave us in such a mess with this church that's supposed to represent you? So I think the church does. And then, of course, terrible family experiences, especially at the hands of people who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ. Those are reasons that just club people like baby seals in terms of their religious movements. So there it is, as raw as it can be. But let me say this, though, because sometimes I give a bad impression of the church in general, because I've been to enough churches where I've met some of the most amazing saints of God you could possibly imagine. One of the most Christ-like and God-like people I've ever met in my life was a guy named Dallas Willard. Some of you know that name, some of you don't know that name, but this guy was a philosopher, philosophy professor at the University of Southern California for years, and probably smarter than anybody in his department by far. And yet he was one of the most devoted Christian men who had the deepest thoughts about what human beings are and who God is and how those two connect. Just an amazing, I'd recommend any of his books. Whether you're a Christian or not, they are well worth plowing through. This guy was one of the real deals, and I've met a number like him too, so they give me great hope. So you Christians out there, if you want to emulate somebody, there's somebody to emulate.
Thanks for your talk tonight. It was wonderful.
So my question is if someone were seeking Christianity, you talked about other faiths, if they were seeking Christianity, I see a lot of divisions within Christianity. There's a lot of different views of it. What would someone, in a thoughtful expression of trying to find their faith, how would they even discern where the truth is within Christianity?
That's a very good and challenging question. I'd say this, and this bugged me a lot as a younger Christian. It seems like we're just every church you go to, especially in the Protestant tradition. You know, it's just it's part of the tradition just to get fed up with what's going on in one church, make a break and start your own. You know. So you end up with the not just a Baptist church, but a two-seed in the Spirit, predestinarian Baptist church. You know, with all these doctrinal specialties. At some point, you end up if possible, you end up overlooking it and you go, wow, you know what? It turns out, although we like to emphasize our differences, it turns out all the churches are very common in some of their core beliefs. And that's why I'm a big fan of some of the creeds, like the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. They really show you that there is a core to Christian belief. It takes off in a number of different directions, and unfortunately, Christians beat each other up over what I would call peripheral doctrines. Well, they already agree on the essential doctrines. And other things like, you know, whether you dunk them or sprinkle them or what color the choir robes ought to be, you know. My goodness, they go after each other with hammer and tongs, and it's terrible. And the gospel writer John made sure that we understood this stuff. He said that the greatest exhibition of, or the greatest presentation of Christ that the church wanted to give would be unity and love for one another, but I'm afraid we've fallen terribly short of that. But there is an essential doctrinal core in the creeds that remains, whether it's Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, or any variety of Protestant. If they fall away from that, I mean, any good Christian is well within their rights to say, I'm not sure you're really stepping up to the rule of faith.
Your expertise is in two very different religions, Buddhism and Mormonism. How did you end up with a focus on such vastly different faiths? And I want to invite you back next week. We're having a contest on drawing Joseph Smith. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been practicing. I don't know what it is about Buddhism and Mormonism. By the way, if you know anything about them, they are on exactly opposite ends of what I would call the metaphysical spectrum. If you ask the question, what is ultimately real to a Mormon, most Mormons wouldn't have any idea what you're talking about. If you talk to some of the religion faculty at BYU, go, what is ultimately real? They'll go, well, according to the prophet Joseph Smith, it's matter. Matter. In fact, there is no spiritual substance. There's only material substance, period. So that's one end of the metaphysical spectrum. The other end of the metaphysical spectrum would be certain forms of Mahayana Buddhism, where they basically say, what is ultimately real? Nothing. But that's not quite right, is it? Because nothing is a kind of something if you think about it hard enough. And so it's beyond nothing. In fact, they had to come up with a special term for it. In Sanskrit, it would be nisvabhava, which translated would be without its own being, or substancelessness. So they're actually working to come up with vocabulary to say, not only is there nothing, there's nothing beyond nothing, you know? And the Mormons believe that everything is a material substance. So I just find that fascinating. I think one reason I became fascinated with Buddhism is just personally, and like I expressed before, I think it might be second in line, a very, very distant second in my like salvific interests. You know, had I not become a Christian, I might have been somebody who was looking closely at Buddhism. In Mormonism, I grew up in Southern California, which has a lot of Mormons, and so I grew up with them in grade school, and went to their dances and ate fudgesicles and everything else. And when I became a Christian, I became aware of the differences in doctrine, so that became fascinating to me. And that's the trajectory. So I kind of independently discovered both, but found them a fascinating comparison. Thanks for the question.
I had to make sure it was okay to ask you a question that had to do with demons. So is that okay if I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. I know a lady who listens to all these sorts of discussions, and there's no doubt in her mind that God exists, but she doesn't believe he's good. And I think she was pursued at an early age, maybe by a spirit who, I don't know. But she knows the stories of Jesus. She believes that she knows many true Christians who want to be like him, and she admires them. She has no animosity towards true Christians. Do you know any people like that who have been deceived that dramatically, and what advice would you give me to minister to her?
So she, you see, she believes in God, but because of personal pain, she was driven away?
No, I think it's been, I don't know if it's generational, I don't know. I don't really know, but it seems like it's always, she's always preferred things that were dark, or she's always preferred the underdog, or she's always been drawn to, you know, she loves snakes, or she loves the Green Goblin, or, you know, whatever. It's always the underdog. She feels like demons have been judged and didn't have a chance, and so.
Yeah, that's you know, I'm not a pastoral sort. And I love hanging around pastoral people, so that when people come to me with pastoral kinds of questions, I pump them immediately to my pastoral friends who actually like people. You know, I don't really like people, so it's not very helpful in the whole pastoral thing. But with this, I tend to direct people to pastoral sorts, and here's how I make a distinction, by the way, in case you find yourself in the same boat, you're wondering if you have pastoral skills or not. You know, this question, I think, falls in a pastoral vein, in that you have to be part of the Christian club, really, for this to be taken seriously or make sense. And in my view, there's a kind of threshold. You know, once the evidence builds to a certain point, you become convinced that this Christian thing is true, that Jesus might be telling the truth, and there might be a whole spiritual world out there. Suddenly you crest the hill and you come down, and suddenly there's all kinds of very vibrant explanations for things like demonic activity that come into play. But you have to have crested the hill in order for that to be taken seriously.
Your background's in biological sciences and human rights studies.
Yeah.
How do those relate to apologetics?
Wow. I think you could all imagine how biology is related to apologetics. You know, where did human beings come from? Is Darwinism really the story that's going to make the most sense in its competition with, say, you know, the Genesis story of origin? So that's kind of a clear and compelling connection. Human rights, though, I hadn't thought a lot about it. I just love the field of human rights. I study at the International Institute for Human Rights in Strasbourg, France, which is quite a wonderful place to go and study, because they tend to train lawyers and judges from around the world, especially in terms of international human rights law. So I studied there for a period of time, and I was sitting over lunch in this cafeteria, and they had the worst food. This was France, for goodness sakes. It's supposed to be great food. But I'm sitting across a table eating some terrible tasting fish with this guy was like a district attorney from Russia, actually from the old Soviet Union. This was back, I think, in the 80s, and we got in this discussion about human rights, right? And it just immediately devolved into a question of, oh my gosh, we can't figure out what a human right is until we figure out what a human being is. And so that showed me the connection immediately with regard to apologetics. In order to understand what a human being actually is, would require a word from above. You actually need eyes in the sky who can see all things and really understand what human beings are about to tell us what human beings are about. And human rights ultimately don't make any sense unless, and I'm pretty convinced of this now, unless human beings are created in the image of God. There's something special, some imprint of God on human beings that does indeed make them special and worthy of certain rights and worthy to avoid certain kinds of suffering. So that's the connection. And so in order to defend that there is a God who has indeed spoken, that requires some good apologetic work.
So you talked about if you were to go on a religious quest, but why go on a quest at all? And why a religious quest and not a philosophical quest? And why not start with like a Cartesian skepticism or something of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, because my whole quest thing was really just a rhetorical way to get people to take religion seriously and see the special aspects of Christianity. I can imagine you go on any number of quests and do about the same thing. And clearly, I mean, we're back to the famous words of Socrates here, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think we need to take that more seriously. I love times like this where we get to, this is just crazy, because we are talking about things that are just simply not allowed in polite society by and large. Yet you've carved out this little nook and cranny of the world where we can do this. And I'm so happy about it. As a professor who loves philosophy and religion and all that, and all the things related to it, the idea that we get to sit and have a big beer and talk about these things is just more fun than I should be allowed to have. So whatever kind of quest you're on, man, give it all you got.
You mentioned Dallas Willard, and I was remembering first time I read Divine Conspiracy by him. So, excluding the Bible, what 5 books have impacted your thinking more than any others, and why?
That's a weird list for me. In fact, I saw somebody doing that on the internet, and so I thought, I'm going to figure out what mine are, and I just sat there without looking at my shelves or anything else and said, what books do I remember having an impact on me? And there were a group of weird books. In fact, there was a book called When Hell Was in Session. You've probably never heard of it. I don't even know it was published by a legitimate publisher, but I got it in the mail one day. You know? I think it was a fundraising booklet. But it was written by Jeremiah Denton. Jeremiah Denton was the longest serving prisoner of war in the American prisoner of war in the Vietnam War. And I don't know, when I read that, I was probably in junior high or high school, and it just gripped me. It was, you know, I lived in comfortable Orange County and, you know, didn't experience a lot of pain as a kid, although my parents were divorced and some stuff like that. But by and large, it's a pretty comfy life, and I read this book and it gripped me. It was my first introduction to how terrible the world could be. And this particular experience meant a lot to me because I was like a kid during the Vietnam War, and I watched it every night on television. It was kind of my window to the world, and something was desperately wrong with the world. I wasn't a Christian. I didn't really have a Christian framework, but man, that logged in. It logged in as a huge problem that one day needs to be solved. And if there's no solution, it's just hopeless. You know? So it's a strange book. I'd say some others, once I became a Christian, probably one of the most meaningful books I read was Confessions by St. Augustine. Augustine of Hippo wrote Confessions. Try to get a great modern translation, because sometimes these were translated in 1954, you know, from Latin by a British person, you know. You might as well read it in Latin, you know. So if you get a great modern English translation, it's just amazing. I mean, if you're looking for authenticity, a guy wrestling with his own innards deeply and honest with his own sin and hopelessness, and yet always with a thread that he's going to that there is hope from beyond his own reach. That's a great book. The Hardy Boys series. That affected me in terms of just whimsy of life. That life is just a constant Hardy Boys adventure. you know, and that we ought not to take ourselves too seriously. There are a lot of mysteries out there, but sometimes they can be solved in 150 pages. And I just love the mysteries, and I love the characters. And there's so many more. I know those are weird ones that you probably weren't expecting. Catch-22. I have no idea. I'd have to just go through some psychoanalysis to figure out why that was important.
Okay. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that Christianity didn't fit into the box of religion. What did you mean by that exactly, and in what ways is religion a box? And follow-up question, how was your flight with Keanu Reeves?
Actually, it was in the Delta Club. Everybody thought I was like sitting next to him, palling around in first class, of course, in the airplane. But I was actually spotted him in the Delta Club in Salt Lake City. And so I posted on Facebook. I go, I am sitting near Keanu Reeves and I am eating gluten-free popcorn, and I'm not sure which is more exciting. And then everybody was posting, oh, popcorn's automatically gluten-free. Anyway, I'm glad they were helping me out with that. The box of religion. By box, I simply mean category. That religion is a kind of thing that once you start to study religions, you go, I know what religion is. It's the thing that you really can't know. It's something that if you really want to join, you kind of close your eyes and you leap into it, because there's no way. It's certainly not scientific, and there's no way to really let evidence come in and help you out. That's what people think about when they're thinking about that category or box they call religion. And so I'm saying, from what I understand about Christianity, it doesn't fit that category because there's so many features that we expect that aren't there. Like the idea that you access it by leaping blindly into it, or that's the best way to access it, or it's the only way to access it. That knowledge plays no role in it, real knowledge, even scientific kinds of knowledge.
So you would say probably more so how people view religion rather than what religion?
Yes and no. I think it's in some ways it's how people view Christianity. They see it as yet another religion, and rightly so. It's got a lot of the features, but I think when you dig deep down, there's some features that stand out from the pack and give Christianity, I think, a special attraction, at least to me.
Last question. How can we pray for you, your family, and your ongoing service at Biola?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've got 4 kids, so I'm always up for prayer. And we're just entering. My oldest is 26. My middle girl, 23-year-old girl, and 21-year-old twin boys. And so I'm heading that phase where they're starting to get boyfriends and girlfriends of a serious nature and such, and I have no idea how to do this father-in-law thing because, I don't like people. So that's where I need help. Pray for the changes in family life coming to the Hazen household.
Dr. Craig Hazen.
Thank you, everybody.